as Don said, on Tuesday, we ran an exercise that brought together federal, state, and local authorities, some Canadian authorities, critical infrastructure to work through the challenges that relate to exactly what we are going to talk about. We did a tabletop exercise with a series of drone attacks on bridges, the electric sector, and civilians, and elicited a lot of information and perspectives on a range of regulatory, policy, and operational and technical gaps. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves, a sentence each, and we will start to my left.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Hewlett. I am the Director of Project Ultra for the Office of Undersecretary of War for Acquisitions and Sustainment. I work for a Grand Sky Research Company in the North Dakota area and part of the Grand Forks County team that administers Project Ultra on behalf of the Department of War. It is a system around integration of all things unmanned aerial systems into the NAS for CONUS-based.
Hi there, I'm Curtis Walters. I'm VP of Commercial Sales and Critical Infrastructure at Echodyne. We're a Kirkland, Washington-based company. I've been around since 2014, and we design and develop radar based here in the United States. I'm personally based in Atlanta, and I've been with the company about 4 years. Our objective is to build the most accurate radar possible to both enable good and proper use of drones with the airspace security use case we're going to talk about, but also detect nefarious drones and counter-UAS.
Good morning, Tom Adams. I'm the Director of Public Safety for Drone Shield. We are we've also been around since 2014. All we do is counter UAS, and that's all that we've done is evolve our capabilities to meet the needs for both defense, law enforcement, and critical infrastructure. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Brett Feddersen, the Vice President of Strategy and Government Affairs at Defense Solutions. We're a counter-drone manufacturer. We are a global leader in RF cyber takeover technology, so taking control of the drones, landing it safely, which is the primary layer of choice when you're doing mitigation out in the field. So happy to be here.
And good morning. I'm Dan Sennett. I'm the co-chair of the National Security Group at Greenberg Traurig. The vast majority of work that I do at Greenberg Traurig is to represent companies within the defense space, both before the Armed Services Committees and Appropriations Committees, and then the executive branch as well.
So I'm going to start out this panel by just kind of laying out, having our panelists lay out their concerns about the threat environment. I will tell you, I joined Venable about a year ago. I came from the White House, where I was the Deputy Homeland Security Advisors, and I worked on all manners of crises. But one of the crises that kept me up at night and that the most, and that I worried about, was the threat posed by drones and in the homeland, and the sufficiency or the lack of sufficiency of protections to adequately address the threat. Over the last year, there's been some important developments, which we will talk about. But before we get to that, I want to just kind of lay down the concerns and the environment. And I'm going to ask my panelists, I guess we'll go in reverse order, so you're not all hearing it at the same time. But what is the thing that keeps you up most at night when you think about the counter-UAS threat?
Well,
in the homeland.
Yeah, the vast majority of my clients are defense-oriented, and I would say that most of their concerns center around the supply chain and making sure. There are obviously a lot of the FCC ruling from December. The National Defense Authorization Act every year contains provisions that restrict sourcing from China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran. And I think that as we continue to build out counter-UAS technology, the need for the supply chain and manufacturing supply chain to grow within the United States is really, really important. Now, there's a lot of investment going into that within the Department of War, but it's going to take some time in order for us to build out that manufacturing capability. And in the meantime, obviously, the threats will remain.
Yeah, I think the thing that keeps me up the most at night is a lack of urgency kind of across the federal government as a whole, specifically to roll out the capabilities and authorities to state, local level, and to critical infrastructure. It took well over a decade to get the landmark legislation for safer skies enacted. And now those of us in industry are seeing a very bureaucratic process that is still stifling the implementation of that legislation. So the fact that we are in the middle of these kind of threats and the fact that we're probably just a couple of actors away from a catastrophe, and yet we still haven't provided the safety that is required, that's what keeps me up at night.
So what keeps me up at night is I travel a lot and I don't sleep well in hotels. But aside from that, I'll kind of give a different outlook on that. One of the things that does kind of concern me is that a lot of potential end users of counter-UAS technology are so focused on mitigation, they forget about the importance of the detection piece for the threat assessment. And a lot of times they don't even want to talk about detection because they're so focused on mitigation. So I think that's a challenge we need to work through.
What keeps me up at night is dealing with buyers in the critical infrastructure space, the lack of awareness and education of this evolving threat. I mean, I've been here for 4 years and it's changed dramatically. So a month ago, I was chatting with someone, very sharp individual at a major utility, and their primary concern was the kid down the street accidentally dropping his drone near a substation versus a kamikaze style FPV that you see on the news every night. And I'm not trying to sell on fear, but there's systems that are being tested and employed today that I see day in and day out that are unfortunately obsolete to the threat that's out there and active right now.
So all really amazing statements. I love the mitigation piece. I'm often concerned about that. But what typically keeps me up at night is the lack of understanding between agencies within our federal government of what the core requirements are across the counter-UAS spectrum. And what I mean by that is everybody's got a different responsibility. So if you take a look at a Core 30 airport, what exists underneath the Mode C veil of a Core 30 airport is everybody's shared responsibility. There are Bureau of Prison things. There are Department of Energy things. There are Department of War things. There's certainly Department of Transportation things. And all of those systems are disparate and do not talk to one another. So how do we adequately layer defense to be able to support and defend the critical infrastructure that exists underneath a Core 30 airport alone is a daunting task. And right now, the federal government is trying to throw a lot at it, but it's very disparate, and in that regard is not aggregated by any stretch of the imagination for a fully articulated and non-compromising airspace utilization. So, we're vulnerable in that respect.
All right, this isn't helping me sleep better. I was already having trouble sleeping at night, worrying about this threat. I think my anxiety level is only increasing after this really thoughtful discussion. What I want to do now is we're going to start with talking about kind of the evolving regulatory and legal framework, and then we're going to move to the technology piece and how to address some of the issues that were just raised with respect to effective detection, and then ultimately, if you need to get there, mitigation. But I'm going to pick up what Brett talked about, which is the Safer Skies Act. I assume everybody in this room knows what that is, but just in case not, that was legislation that was passed in December of last year as part of the National Defense Authorization Act that for the first time explicitly gave state and local authorities and correctional facilities who have been trained by the FBI currently and potentially other foreign partners, federal partners, not foreign partners, federal partners over time to engage in specified mitigation measures. Brett, I'm going to turn to you for two reasons. I heard you speak yesterday about the first time that this authority has been exercised, so I think it would be interesting for this group to hear about that. And then I want to talk about some of the implementation challenges that you already mentioned with respect to Safer Skies.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Let me go hand in hand with both of those. So the Pennsylvania State Police was the first state agency to mitigate drones during an operation using the Safer Skies Act. They did do it under the FBI's task force authority. They did it in Pittsburgh at the NFL draft. If you didn't hear yesterday, there were 18 drones that were detected. 2 of them were actually mitigated, and the rest of the pilots were actually interdicted by ground forces, which is all part of FBI training and at the facility in Huntsville. The problem is that the law gives the authority to state and local law enforcement clearly, so long as you are trained to mitigate, and it gives you a reporting requirement back to the federal government. However, the FBI is currently training that these systems cannot be turned on without a 124N package that the FBI has been doing. So the FBI has been complaining for 6 years that they've been restricted, can't do a good packet, they don't have the resources. And in turn, for implementation of Safer Skies with the expansion they've been requesting, they're implementing the same bureaucratic process on state and local law enforcement. So case in point, at the NFL draft, the 124N packet, which is the authority packet and the CONOP that is used, the FBI put in place for the TFR, matching the temporary flight restrictions the FAA did, which was an hour before the NFL draft and an hour after the NFL draft. Then it came back that, oh yeah, we have full days of fan zones. You know, the 320,000 on the first day are out there partying, enjoying things, and doing different sessions across the city of Pittsburgh. So the TFR was opened up to conclude the full day. The FBI did not open up the 124N packet. So the Pennsylvania State Police sat there with the capability to detect drones, but was forced to keep it off because the FBI did not allow the authority or allow the piece to continue. So fans over the 3-day period were not protected, or at least not receiving detection pieces by the state police because the FBI is still stuck in that bureaucratic process. So those are the things that we're going to change. We don't disagree with federal oversight, but there has to be some common sense application for these type of laws that are meant to protect us across the country.
Other panelists want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll weigh in a little bit. As a former FBI counter-drone supervisor, program manager, I didn't really complain about the packets, so I don't know who's complaining now. But the packets were necessary to the deployment of this capability has implications with other security stakeholders. It has potential implications on the safety and security of the national airspace, the integrity of the communication spectrum. There's a lot of people that have, want to have an understanding of what's going on in the process. And so, that whole packet process was necessary just so that people aren't, there were sometimes cases where we were working in the same area as Secret Service. And so when you have other, and also authorized drones in the airspace. And so there needs to be that internal coordination and communication. I do agree that it needs to probably be where it can scale better so that you can, add in, there's going to be a lot of missions that are going to be requested, especially once they kind of understand how they're going to implement the technology. We're going to have some NFL games coming this fall, and there's going to be, a bunch of stadiums that with jurisdictions are going to have that capability. There's going to be corrections. They're going to be doing 24/7, 365 operations eventually when they get changed and trained. And so there's certainly do need to scale, but I think that coordination and the knowledge of all the internal stakeholders and all the different agencies needs to still be a part of that in some way.
So I want to tag on to that because I think you're spot on, but I think there's a different situation at play here. This subject of counter-UAS often becomes a mitigation conversation, which we were talking about earlier, but I think it really is a traffic management conversation. At the Department of War, when I have conversations with them, they're very fond of saying there is no such thing as UTM. UAS traffic management really doesn't mean anything. Traffic management is just traffic management. And so if we're talking segregated airspace, that would make sense for UTM. But this is desegregated, the conversation, because as a poor state actor or clueless and careless is not going to stick to segregated airspace where a drone is supposed to be. They're going to go to desegregated airspace. And they're going to use that as an approach vector. Right. So if you're not taking a look at this as a fully traffic management integrated process where you're looking for needles in a haystack and how do you remove all the hay and everything that's left over as a potential needle, you're approaching the problem from the wrong detection, tracking, and identification perspective. And therefore, you're never going to get to mitigation because you're never going to fully identify who should be mitigated and how you should mitigate it. So that's part of the problem. This is really a traffic management scheme. And for the longest time in our industry, it's been, we're going to keep drones away from the national airspace system. Now we're talking about aggregating them into the national airspace system. That complicates the problem significantly. And so if we can get to the DTI piece and we can be assured of what is in the airspace, then we can mitigate it. But that's where the first problem exists, is really traffic management.
So that's a good segue to another key regulatory development that happened over the last week. Before I get there, I just want to add one other piece on Safer Skies implementation that I've heard a lot of comments and complaints about. Is part of the issue is also in order for state and locals to be able to take advantage of this new authority, they need to be trained, as Brett already mentioned. And the training facility is being managed in a single place in Alabama, in Huntsville, by the FBI with very limited throughput. And you think about the fact that we have tens of thousands of state and local officials across the country. There needs to be some creative thinking, in my opinion, about how to both ensure consistency of training, but to expand the aperture in terms of who can do that training.
Can I make one comment on that? My understanding is that the 11 locations for the FIFA World Cup, those locations have so far gone through the training, and which is surprising to me actually, because we're talking November is when they stood up this this training. The fact that they were able to put that many people through, I think, is great. I think it does remain to be seen, though, once all of the federal funding kind of starts to evaporate, what is going to be the flow through, who's going to be paying for it, who's going to be paying for the TDY for all these state and local folks to get down there. The other thing I think on Safer Skies, just the way it got in the National Defense Authorization Act is the administration really wanted this badly. There were a lot of questions among the committees of jurisdiction that they felt had not been ironed out, but the administration wanted it badly, and so the leadership put it into the NDAA. So I think there are a few things that still need to get ironed out over the course of the next few years. I think we will probably see in the coming National Defense Authorization Act some clarification and modification of that.
Let me, if I can just jump on that, and I'm not here to FBI bash, because I was really impressed that that from concept to actual training was less than 8 months, which doesn't happen in the federal government. And they were experts in the deployment piece. The issue I think that you're hearing is the fact that each class only had 15 individuals. So each police department only had 1 or 2 operators go through the course. And those are the only individuals then that can do the operation of that system, which logistically we all know, unless you're doing 24/7 ops and paying for the overtime and that individual's not sleeping, that's not happening. So it's that kind of throughput that we're looking to see train the trainer course or expand a little bit more across the federal government, maybe into FLETC with DHS to enable kind of a quicker pipeline for 18,000 police departments.
I'll jump in real quick. So yeah, I mean, the throughput isn't what people want. They're in the early stages. The FBI hasn't been historically funded. Their counter-UAS program has been a science experiment. I'm not even going to tell you the budget that I had to work with. It was ridiculous. A lot of car washes I had to do. It was really, really embarrassing.
Fundraisers.
Yeah, fundraisers and stuff like that. And it's my understanding they're supposed to receive some funding to turn that counter-UAS program into a section that would have a training unit, an R&D unit, and an operational unit. Increase the staffing, the throughput. But so that. I think that will help. I think they maybe need to look at corrections a little bit differently than someone who might be doing stadium security, protecting critical infrastructure. I think that needs to be looked at differently. But I also think there's some onus on the state and local law enforcement agencies. You can't train every person that you want. On the bomb tech program, the bomb technician program, of which this counter-UAS training program is modeled after, there's 468-ish bomb squads. Not every jurisdiction that wants to have a bomb squad can't have a bomb squad because there's only limited resources to train these people. But it's important that the departments that do want to have this authority pick the right individuals who are going to be in that program for a sustained period of time. So if you choose someone to go to that training and they're on the promotions list to be a lieutenant, and they're doing traffic stuff, and now you don't have your counter-UAS person anymore, well, that's your fault. You should have chosen somebody who's more going to be in that job for a long period of time. So, it's on them to do some of that stuff too. So it's not all the FBI's fault.
Okay, I promise we're going to move away from mitigation now. So what I want to do is just talk briefly about another kind of key regulatory policy development that occurred just last week. The FAA released its very long-awaited notice of proposed rulemaking with respect to Section 2209. When I say long-awaited, this was Section 2209 from the 2016 Federal Aviation Act authorization that required at the time the FAA to put in place a rule that would enable critical infrastructure owners and operators that have fixed site facilities to go directly to the FAA to get temporary flight restrictions in place. Now, like to FAA to make it slightly less a critique of the FAA, there were some like interim changes to the language of the rule that required them to shift the rulemaking a little bit. But this is a very, very long-awaited rule. The comment period ends July 7th and addresses, once implemented, is really a sea change in terms of how critical infrastructure owners and operators can potentially obtain flight restrictions. Curtis, I know you do a lot of work with critical infrastructure owners and operators, so I'll turn to you first for your thoughts.
Yeah, we're excited to see some momentum and movement here for sure. I know there's references to remote ID, which is great for seeing the cooperative aircraft. You know, the world we live in from a radar perspective is really focusing in on the non-cooperative. And you know, we believe that that's where the threat is on both sides of the coin of both use cases. And with counter-UAS specifically, it's the drones that are flying dark. And how do you detect that? What sensors are you inserting into place so that you are capable of detecting the non-cooperative? Because that is where the threat is going to lie. And how comfortable are you with the sensor technology and the technology that can fuse that data with other sensor modalities so that you have a good accurate picture and can have good track data so that I can take action upon that when mitigation is available.
One thing I thought was striking is the prediction is about 9,000 applications. So that is going to be an incredible, in addition to an incredible workload in approving all of those, that's going to be an incredible map to try and manage. I think the other thing that's interesting is the definitive statement that national airspace is federal jurisdiction and federal preemption of any state assertion of authority or rulemaking on that. I think those are the two things that jumped out at me.
So I just want to kind of turn and honest. I'm big on UTM and detection, but the mitigation concept here, right? We applaud 2209. It's been asked for forever. I think it's great to get critical infrastructure to plan and think this way. But the law doesn't state that mitigation is tied to a flight restriction. And I think it's important to understand that it's tied to safety and threat. And so even though we're doing this and allowing the concept, it does not mean that that is the only place that detection and mitigation should be had.
Yeah, spot on. Because now start thinking about the problem we've created for ourselves. Not saying this wasn't expected and wasn't needed, but now are we pulling the veil off of, our incapacity to understand just what's out there? So all these critical infrastructure owners who are now applying for these TFRs, are they doing it because they've already seen drones? And now we're going to see just how many we're aware of are in those areas. And what's that 9,000 really create for us? It's this unveiled opportunity for us to all of a sudden see the interoperability of what is the daunting task of making this a nationwide opportunity. And I don't know how we manage 9,000 TFRs. That seems like a very critical problem.
So I think the prediction was 9,000 applications, not necessarily 9,000 TFRs granted.
I understand that, but that's
right.
still, if they all apply and they all are granted, it's 9,000 TFRs. I don't even know what the airspace looks like with 9,000 TFRs.
Yeah, I mean, I think, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
But your point is a good one, which with the broadening now 124N for state, local, territorial, and tribal, and then this, I mean, that first part of 124N kind of gives that authority, right? Without this designation. So I don't know if it's shooting behind the duck or what the actual benefit is going to be.
I'm going to throw something out for people to react to, which this gets to the airspace awareness piece. Assuming that there's not 9,000, but assuming that there's a sensible allocation of TFRs, what it does do is it helps owners and operators be able to more clearly specify, like, this is a drone. Like, it is clear that you are not authorized to fly a drone in this space, and therefore, if you are an unauthorized drone, you are. I mean, before we even get to mitigation, you're subject to potential civil and criminal penalties, and then we can start talking about whether or not it rises to the level that you need to take mitigation action as well.
I think that's right. I just hope there is no confusion about people's authorities if they don't have one of those. You know what I'm saying?
Well, your point, though, is perfect, because you said that statement, authorized. Who determines authorized, and how do we determine who's authorized and authorized? My concern for this blanket approval, it's not blanket approval, but to your statement, right now we're going to have these. Is it ready, fire, aim? I mean, really, honestly, the DTI process has not changed at all. So what's the efficacy of proving that that's an unauthorized drone?
So let's turn to the detection piece, because I think that's important, and I want to talk through what is needed. And we heard this a little bit from the last panel, but I think we can pick up that conversation as well. What is needed to do effective detection? But I do want to be clear, just from like a legal authorities piece. At this point, critical infrastructure operators and owners do not have any authority to shoot down or take mitigation action with respect to drones. So they can put these in place. They can use that to then call state and local to do a range of things, which is go and talk to the owners and operators. Maybe if they have mitigation authority and it's determined that this is the kind of situation where it's appropriate to use that mitigation authority, there would be some mitigation measures taken. But it does not, there's nothing in 2209 that gives critical infrastructure owners or operators the authority to take mitigation action. Okay, let's talk about how we do. Like, you keep coming back to this a point, which I completely agree with, that, we already did this in this panel. We jumped ahead to mitigation, but we need to start with detection first. So how do we do detection right? What is needed? I mean, it's complicated, obviously.
It is. It's one of the things that we're working on right now. So the Department of War, Department of Homeland Security, everybody's got a requirement for a federal USS. Right, so a UAS service supplier that can aggregate data, push data out to SDSPs, ANSPs, and UAS operators. But what is the interoperability from a federal USS to a commercial UAS operator and a USS operator look like? What's that data transfer? So at the end of the day, in order to solve the counter-UAS problem for the Department of War, here's the question that I had to ask in reverse. We all know what it looks like for an Amazon truck to drive onto a U.S. military installation, go through its inspection process, deliver its packages, and then depart. And there's a log, and it's all recorded, and all of that's done in coordination and collaboration between Amazon and the Department of War. So what does it look like for an Amazon drone to do the same exact thing? Leave a distribution facility in and around a Core 30 airport, fly to a U.S. military installation, cross the boundary of the Title 10 responsibility, inculcate into that airspace, deliver a package, leave that airspace, log that it's leaving that airspace, and then enter into the commercial variant of that airspace and come back to the distribution facility and land. It sounds like a simple process, but that in and of itself is the critical component to understanding who's in the airspace, why they're there, and whether or not they're authorized to be there, and the transfer of custody between the commercial and the federal side of the house. And oh, by the way, TSA, by mandate under Title 10, gets a whole vote in the whole process because they're responsible for package security and delivery within the continental United States of America. How many federal agencies just had a conversation in cyberspace in order to make that delivery happen? That's where this really comes down to. And so when you get to this is now a poor actor, this is somebody who's doing something careless and clueless, we're not just going to blow them out of the sky. And we need to make sure, oh, by the way, that that's not a bald eagle, that it's not somebody's sandwich, and God forbid it's not somebody's family, that we're mitigating in that process. That's where I start talking about the air domain picture and where the data exchange is in order to facilitate that type of operation.
Curtis, or go ahead.
Spot on. It starts with accurate data, as accurate as data as possible that's coordinated, where you have sensors that are coordinated. So it's one thing to know that, yes, there is a non-cooperative aircraft in space, but if I can align that to ADS-B data, then I can remove some of that hay from the haystack. that you were just talking about, and providing that in as real time as possible with classification, with confidence and certainty, so that you can make those quick decisions versus that time to respond. And you're also spot on with the, it doesn't just stop at 400 feet, right? A couple of weeks ago at San Diego Airport, you had a consumer drone flying at 3,000 feet that an aircraft ran into. So the airspace isn't getting any quieter. It's much more busy, and the accuracy and the level of data is critical in that world.
Curtis, can you just talk for a second about the kind, when we talk about sensors and we talk about detection, and there's a lot of conversation about the need for a multi-layered system. What do we need in that system? What's like the core components of that? Obviously, it would be wonderful if every drone flying around had a remote ID and RF detection was sufficient, but we know that's not the case.
Yeah.
So what should entities be thinking about?
Right. Higher level, it's those that can do, compliant and non-compliant, because there's but the Swiss cheese model, right? If all of my cheese has the same hole, then it's just one piece of cheese. And so it's remote ID, it's ADSB, it's RF DF detection, it's radar when you can get it, it's potentially acoustic. So as many different modalities as possible to sort of identify and determine what's in that volume of airspace that I'm interested in, and coordinated activity with the higher level, very important from a C2 perspective, command and control software perspective, those that can fuse that data as accurately as possible and as quickly as possible.
And who should be responsible for putting that system in place? I mean, because it costs a lot of, it's not cheap, right? And if you have a really truly effective multi-layered system, we're talking significant dollars. So where does that responsibility lie to get that in place?
That's a good question. It's evolving, and I'm trying to find that answer myself, because as a radar manufacturer, we have, like, DFR is one of our use cases. It's one of my favorites because it does such a good job of enabling technology into the law enforcement realm. So we have radar all over the country that's used for that one specific use case. We also have neighboring use cases. In one municipality, we have folks that are wanting to use our radar to help clear the airspace for drone deliveries. And we have the radar data there, but it's not a shared resource. And so ultimately, pie in the sky, in my mind, it's some sort of shared, sensor as a service resource that folks can tap into and subscribe to, and have, multiple use cases into that. But today it's each law enforcement agency, it's each CI, security team. I think there needs to be a higher level authority and funding to help really push this through.
So that's perfect segue, because what we're finding is that we start doing more test and evaluation is the concept of universal electronic conspicuity that you're mentioning here, which is just everything is completely aware of where everything else is because we're all being transparent in the airspace, is interesting, especially at the Department of War, as we start talking the integration, the application program interface from all the sensors and all of the aggregated systems that are talking to the sensors. There is a tremendous amount that's available to us in the United States of America from an infrastructure perspective that we are not currently taking advantage of for our ability to create awareness in the national airspace system. There's cell towers, there's GNSS, there's sat-nav, there's all kinds of things that are already being used in the drone industry, in the aviation industry, but they're not fully aggregated into the UAS service suppliers. They're not, it's not articulated in any of our policy and process that we need to use them. And we have not done a great job of articulating to our own selves how all of that information could be aggregated into a universal common operating picture that the Federal Aviation Administration, Department of War, and Department of Homeland Security can all tag into so that they can create that awareness of universal electronic conspicuity. So I think before we go, not suggesting that you're wrong about we need enhanced radars, we need better systems and identification processes, but I think before we go down the process of being a hammer looking for a nail, we need to kind of backtrack and figure out what technology we do have and how we can aggregate it into a common operating picture that allows everybody to do a data exchange and find out what the gap is, and then solve for the gap in the technology, which would probably be some very high resolution radar systems.
I think the key in a lot of this is, treating these as aircraft. That's what the definition is, right? So if we do ATOs in the military where you're able to identify and control what's flying in what airspace, realizing that the drones are not toys, that you have a responsibility if you're flying them. We've already gone through the court cases on whether or not you have reasonable expectation of privacy when you're flying these things. So we treat them as aircraft, put them in the system, open up transparency. And by that, I mean, there's no reason why we can't look at these like ADSB. where anybody can see what's flying around in their backyard or spot these and watch these as they kind of go through. But that is information sharing, that is network IDing, that is all those things which regulation and vendors can do for integration.
I do think there is one piece of that is super important with regard to the Department of Defense that we probably don't want to replicate, which is the ATO process, which is incredibly cumbersome, slow, and is not made for modern technology, right? Where it's a software platform really is what we're talking about. And so there are constant updates being pushed. And every time you've got to get a new ATO. So I take the point, but I would just say that's the one piece we don't want to replicate from DoD.
No chaos.
Tom, you wanna-
I mean, I think they've brought up a lot of great points. I guess a couple of things to add is that, initially when people started talking about this mission, they're always concerned just about the drone piece, but this is really a broader airspace awareness piece that includes, cooperative and non-cooperative crewed aircraft, and then cooperative and non-cooperative uncrewed aircraft. And, even knowledge of other things that might be misidentified as drones in the airspace, such as low level Earth orbit satellites and planets, which have been misidentified during counter drone operations. But on the other side of it too is, I don't think I've had a conversation with an owner and operator of critical infrastructure or a law enforcement agency who wants to do their mission in a bubble. I think everybody wants to have shared data, shared airspace awareness picture beyond what maybe their sensors can see. And so I think that's the name of the game going in the future is data sharing, so you can have a broader understanding and make a greater threat assessment. Because drones that are doing nefarious things, they don't tell you that they're doing nefarious things. You have to gather the information from the data that you have available. And if you don't have any data available, then it's going to be hard to make that assessment.
Well said. David, back to you. You started off by raising concerns about the supply chain issues, which is another critical component of this conversation, no pun intended. And I mean, obviously, among other things, we know, or we don't know, but the estimates are that, 75 to 85% of local law enforcement and state police are using DJI drones. And so how do we go about tackling this problem while also, continuing to enable teams to use drones for really useful safety purposes?
Yeah, I think it really is about, and that's something that the Department of Defense, as many know, actually, they own that problem as much as the civilian sector does. The Department of Defense has tried to do a lot over the course of the last few years in expanding the supply chain and manufacturing of drones in the United States. The problem is there are large infusions of cash in order to expand your production line. But then on the other end, there has to actually be purchase orders. People have to actually be buying these drones, and the department has not necessarily done a great job of that. I think that that is something they've realized, and they've started to, drone dominance was primarily that first tranche was focused on one-way attack drones. And now the department is realizing we also need, if we're going to have the killer drones, we have to have the hunter drones as well. And so that is really what is helping a lot of U.S. manufacturers is seeing a path to actually selling these things. I think with regard to state and local law enforcement, I completely agree with you that is a very difficult problem. It's sort of like the Huawei ZTE rip and replace. Is it going to take a pot of money that these state and local governments can then draw on federal money in order to get those DJI drones out of the system? Absolutely. But in the context of counter-UAS, here's our golden opportunity, right? Most of them don't have this technology. They're acquiring it right now. And so making sure that we are incredibly clear about what is permissible technology and what we don't want federal dollars going to, I think, is the most important piece.
So that's a perfect statement, and I agree with you 100%. I think one of the other problems that the federal agencies have is if you can liken it to the evolution of cell phones into the federal government. For me, when I worked at the Pentagon a long time ago, everybody had Blackberries. I mean, that was the thing, right? Everybody across all federal agencies had Blackberries. We call them crackberries, actually, because that was all we had, right? That is not by any stretch of the imagination the current cell phone. And if anybody still has a BlackBerry, I'd love to see it, just like memorabilia kind of thing. But I mean, like nobody has BlackBerries anymore, right? So it's this weird inflection point with drones and unmanned systems in the federal government where it's almost like nobody inside the agencies wants to pick a winner. We had no problem with cell phones picking who the winner was. It didn't even last. There's no BlackBerries in the Pentagon anymore. Everybody has cell phones that are either a Samsung or an iPhone. So I don't know why there's this hesitancy now to pick a specific technology as a winner for the federal government and move forward with that and actually put it into the system and start working with it from a manufacturing perspective.
I think the only caveat, and I completely agree with you, the only caveat to that is what we are looking for is supply chain resiliency as well. Sure. Right. And so we can't have a single point of failure, which we have seen, right? DJI, they were able to sacrifice profit for market share, right? To 76% or whatever they are global share. So I think within the United States, we definitely need to be able to foster a few different winners.
So not a rebuttal, but just so working with Group 3 drones, right? So 300 to 1300. There are only two companies that make two-stroke engines in the world. Okay, and one of them's German and one of them's Chinese. Okay, and so we can't buy any of the Chinese ones, but we can buy the German ones. Why isn't there an American company that makes a two-stroke engine that we can use? Well, I mean, right, exactly. Right, exactly. So I'm just saying, right? Building up the defense industrial, but heck, we're sitting in Detroit. This is the place where they won World War II from a manufacturing perspective, and there's a lot of empty spaces where you can brownfield a facility overnight. So I think that's where we just need to get into the reality of the situation and start identifying the critical components list and say, these are the things that need to be manufactured at scale. Because even though the drone, I agree with you, we won't pick a company, but all of them use the same servos, the same rotors, the same engines. It's not like it's that complicated. I did make the mistake once. I was doing a lecture like this with NASA, and I said, this is not rocket science. And I looked out in the audience, and they were staring at me, and I said, okay, maybe in this case, it's rocket science.
I'm going to turn it over for some. I want to hear some of your questions too and engage the audience. My request is that they're questions, not speeches. So we will take your questions.
Yeah, so I was looking at the 2209 comments yesterday, and it seemed the vast majority of the comments were people complaining about the balkanization of the airspace with these flight restricted areas. But it seems to me like most of them are going to be this lower level of protection where anybody except hobbyists can still fly over it if they give notice. So I just wondering, do you guys think that risk of balkanization is real, or is it just kind of illusory as this rolls out?
I think there's some truth to it. I mean, and you go back to the core, the FAA will tell you, and coming from the FAA, I know that this is the mantra, right? Safety first, but it is free airspace. And the goal of the FAA is to ensure that the American public, free as they are, can fly, in the airspace. But we have rules. When you get in a car and get on the road, you have rules you have to end up following. So I think there is concern with it on both the federal side as well as the public side. Which is why I think they're very concerned about how many applications and what type of eligibility they go through with it. But there has to be a common understanding too, right? Going back with Curtis and talking about oil and gas, oil and gas don't let cell phones into their facilities because a lithium battery can literally blow up the entire plant. So why would we let one fly over it? Right. And so these are the kind of things that have to be, again, educated and understand as we kind of go through so that even the hobbyist understands that maybe I shouldn't be taking pictures of Exxon right now.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Kenji Sugahara. I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Aviation, also on the Oregon Homeland Security Council. And we are in the midst of drafting a statewide counter-UAS plan. So I have an idea of what sort of structure and what elements are going to be absolutely critical in there, but I want to get your feedback on what I should be including in our statewide counter-UAS plan that will also probably be used by DHS as a national model.
Great question and a great group of experts to answer your
I'm
question.
going to start and then pass the mic, but it's mandating coordination communication, right? Don't let them think that they can go ahead and just come up with a policy and go out and operate. They have to talk to the federal agencies, especially the FAA, in coordination, right? They have to understand their rules with the FCC and so on. So it's giving them the ability or a pathway to make sure that everybody's included.
I think to add on to Brett's comments is, this is a whole of Oregon approach, where you're going to have the National Guard, Emergency Management Agency, your, State Department Homeland Agency, all the state and local law enforcement, your Department of Aviation, your Department of Transportation. For, it's going to be a lot of people that are going to be involved, and then it's, nobody wants these silos of detection excellence. There's probably going to want to be a state shared airspace awareness picture somewhere in there too, so that you have a good idea what's going on. And you probably already thought about some of those things. I see you smiling and laughing. It's like, yeah, I'm on the right track. So good job.
My advice is when you write your statements, make sure that the overall theme of it allows for adaptability, flexibility, and scalability. The enemy always gets a vote, so no plan survives first contact. Like Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the nose, right? So the enemy is going to react to what you do. They're going to change their tactics. If you write something that's so rigid that doesn't allow you the flexibility to change in the future to adapt to what they do, then it's a fail out the gates. The second thing is it needs to be an open architecture. If you're stovepiping your technology into one siloed thing that does not talk to the next state next to you, you've crushed commerce and there's no point to it, and your governor's just going to go, no thanks.
Curtis, anything to add?
I think they covered it. From a technology perspective, I think, it's the same concept, right? Evaluating the threat, understanding what the true threat is, educating yourself on that, and then identifying the appropriate technology to cover that.
Just one small addendum on that, and correct me if you disagree with me, but the answer for the right technology will vary depending on the geography.
Correct. Very, very important. Design is critical.
Something to add to that too. I think a lot of people get pigeonholed and think that I need to, like they're choosing a partner for life or a college, that I have to pigeonhole everything into one technology provider, and you really don't. What you want to do in Pendleton is going to be different than what you want to do to protect Hayward Field in Eugene. So you got to have a mix of tech. There's never going to be a cookie cutter solution, but as long as they can all be talking to one greater picture, then I think you're set up for success. But don't be pigeonholed in, I've got to pick company A and the whole state's got to use company A. That's not how it's going to work.
The approved equipment list will change.
Other questions?
Sure. Now the Kenji Shugahara show.
There's one more, Don, there's one more over there too.
Oh, where? Okay.
Yeah. Question is where are we with the data sharing part? I know of a number of states that are participating in the multi-state AAM collaborative, and a number of them are implementing flight information exchanges where you can share airspace data with partners. But I don't know how established that is. I'd be curious for your thoughts on how states and federal and Department of War can collaborate on that big airspace picture.
Yeah, that's something that could be done much better, and it's a talking point every time I talk to a government agency. Vendors, just so you're aware, every time there's a demo, every time there's an evaluation, every time there's testing for every federal agency, it's a new series where your vendor is paying for that and getting it done and working with that one agency, and those agencies then do not share information. Coming from the AAM industry before I jumped into this company, it's the same way in states. Each state is coming up with their own center of excellence, whether it's for advanced air mobility or for counter-UAS or drone dominance kind of aspects. They are not talking to each other. There is a healthy competition between universities across the states. There are companies that have land that are trying to figure out training areas or airspace areas and develop the first corridors back and forth. It is definitely not being pulled together and shared.
So that's probably the vast majority of what's going on in the United States, but I'll just offer a different perspective for what we're doing right now. So for Project Ultra, while I've been sitting here at this wonderful exposition for all of us to be together, my team has been working with the Department of War, Department of Homeland Security, JIATA 401, Point Defense Battle Lab, which is stationed at Grand Forks Air Force Base. And we've been running tests and evaluation all week long in a simulated world between Optics, which is a commercial USS, and the Clue system for AFRL, which is a federal USS, on data exchange specifically to set up for live flight demonstrations that we're going to do in the summer, starting here in June. We're flying a Group 3 from Grand Forks Air Force Base to Cavalier Space Force Station in the NAS, no chase aircraft, squawking and talking, but doing the data exchange between the two USSs, simultaneously running counter-UAS simulations on top of that on behalf of 401 Point Defense Battle Lab and TSA TSOC to run the data exchange platforms in real time along with threats that come in and see how the whole thing works, right? To start that process, to start building out TTPs and SOPs and getting to the crux of what needs to be done at a scaled implementation. And that will derive a ton of reports and flow into the next task order and continue the process to continue to grow. So at a very microcosm level, we're starting that data exchange process amongst federal agencies. It's not nationwide, like you just said, but yeah, we're there at that point now. So while I'm sitting here talking, the simulations are running.
Cool. So you're very lucky because I'm actually one of the leads on the multi-state collaborative, and actually am writing the minimum viable infrastructure piece too. So we are actually talking to each other, a lot of the states on a lot of these topics, especially on the flight information exchange of data. So that's actually occurring. And I'm also the emerging aeronautics chair for the National Association of State Aviation Officials. And what you're also finding is, for example, you saw with the EIPP, there have been a lot of states that have been working together. So a lot of the awardees cover multiple states. But that's not my question. My question is, how important is third-party validation in the selection process? And do we need to support DHS and USTEEL in that validation? Because they don't have much staff. So what are your thoughts on that?
So you're talking about TSA within DHS, or are you talking about DHS proper? And the reason why I say that is because what I've been hearing inside of the federal government, if it hasn't permeated this room or this conference, is that TSA and the TSOC will be the lead federal agency for defense of the core 30 airports in the National Capital Region. So why I say that's important, because what does it mean to impact a core 30 airport? The economic global impact from taking down a core 30 airport is insurmountable. I mean, that's one of the things that they're starting to state. So if I start taking a look at core 30 airports, not every state has one, but you're going to have states that are adjacent to them. So if your core 30 airport defines your counter-UAS requirements for your state, why would you have a different model than what TSA puts in place and says, from a DHS perspective, this is the interoperability of how a core 30 and the Mode C veil that it encompasses is going to transpire. And all of the other agencies, DOE, DOT, DOW, all within that are going to have to react to that. So once you do that and you put that in place and create that interoperability piece, now every adjacent state, every adjacent city, every adjacent township will have to operate something that feeds into that and is accepting of that type of data exchange. So that creates basically a model, whether you want it or not, that's going to permeate the entire country.
That, I think the question was, I think that all makes incredible sense. If I understood correctly, I think the question was slightly different than that. You're asking about validation of particular technologies, right? And right now, DHS is doing this in New Steel. And the question is, like, do I have to use that because their throughput is not very large? Yep.
So they're trying to figure out what the model looks like before they go to the technology. That's what I was trying to say, is that reality check, you can't pick the technology before you actually have the architecture of the model. So That's what they're trying to figure out, and they're starting with the National Capital Region first.
So I would go, I'm going to say yes. I'm not going to say yes to DHS doing it, but the FCC model, which is global for laboratories that are FCC certified to look at technology, all kinds of technology. I think vendors would welcome a third-party capability where you could take your system, get it tested, and then that validation is shared across the government, writ large.
Proper testing is critical, and we welcome third parties because that separates what's marketing, what's on a spec sheet versus what actually functions, and we welcome that as a vendor.
Yeah, I'll just add in one more thing. We've been doing demotainment for years, and so we need to do this in a way that we don't have to do a different validation for each state or something like that, because counter-UAS companies spend just ridiculous amounts of monies going to this demo and that demo and this demo and that demo, and the information is not shared. The sales cycle for this stuff, it ends up being pushed to months and years, and so we have to get out of this. We're going to do endless demonstrations. The stuff's been demonstrated a zillion times.
Okay.
JIF 401's releasing a marketplace with all of the technology that's been tested, probably later this summer.
It's active now, but the problem is that you need a CAT card to access it.
Right, and they're trying to take it to the next level so they can share it with the interagency. And the same thing with TSA. TSA's got a test and evaluation process.
And DHS and DOJ are putting together their own list too, which also create, we talk about coordination. It's, even with the lists, we're going to have 3 different lists.
I'm not on the panel, but I'm going to exercise my right as the host of this entire event just to use the last minute to say 2 things. One is, I think industry would welcome third-party assessors if they're not going to do what we see in some other spaces where they're charging $15,000 a checklist, and they're taking $100,000 to $250,000 from young companies and taking 2 years for approvals. Okay, so that's my first point. Okay, getting off my soapbox. And then my second point is, I think you guys are talking past each other, but and I'll tell you why. Because Kenji's talking about a fix, FIX, it's an acronym. So there's this thing called the Virginia Fix. It's a system where, again, it's an awareness system at the state level. My guess is, Chris, you've never heard of it. And my guess is a lot of people haven't. And the DOW is spinning wheels, whereas John Eberhardt and ATA and the NASAO, which is the National Association of State Aviation Officials, have been, and this multi-state collaborative are out there and they're doing stuff. And the right hand isn't talking to the left. So in that regard, please follow Autonomy Global. I've got podcasts, I've got articles about all of these things. If you want to start connecting the dots, this is where you find this information. But I've had John Eberhardt on the podcast. I've done articles about it. So this is really important because, again, it's not a criticism of anybody. Everybody's kind of in their own space, right? So they might not have that awareness. No pun intended, because that's what this panel's about. So great way to end it. Let you wrap it up.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank the panel. Really important discussion, a lot of work to do, and a lot of great insights.
Sure.